as I mentioned before, writing tests is going to be a very solid part of your time programming FunC contracts. So let's recap our tests created in previous lesson. And we will now start updating it. And it's worth mentioning that if we run yarn test now, it's not going to work because our contract code changed significantly. And let's just try doing it, yarn test. The test is supposed to fail, actually, because the get method data is just giving wrong information, because we would expect the first one to be integer, but here it's just different. So we will have to update it. And what we need to do in order to fix that? First, we need to provide a proper initial state data. So our C4 storage has some data pre-filled. We are going to provide 0 as the counter value, and just some address as the most recent sender address. So we don't really care what this address is going to be. We need to also pass a specific operation command inside of the body message. So we send to the contract a specific comment what it should do with this logic. So let's deal first with initial data. As you remember, in our testing suite sandbox, we're using a create from config method in our wrapper. So we initialize our contract. And we're setting the initial data there in the following way. Let's get back to the wrappers folder. And we have here this create from config. And then this create from config is actually called here. And you can see we are passing empty config. So, but now we are going to implement it in a different way. So as you can see in the wrapper, config has just any type. But now we are going to actually create a new type that will be called main contract config. And it is going to be of type number and address, just like we saw in the FunC code. When we're reading it, there's number first and then address. So now this config will be of type main contract config. And at this point, obviously, we will see error here because create from config now expect us to set the number. So we're going to set it to 0. And before we actually finalize it here, let's see how we put the config that we are putting here, how we actually put it into the memory. So, of course, we need to construct a cell. And this is why we'll have another cool function called main contract config to cell. It would accept config of this type, main contract config, and it would return a cell. So just like you already seen this before, we are using builder. So we do begin cell, we run store uint, we provide it with a number, and then we say that it has to be taking only 32 bits, and the rest is going to be address. And then we just finish the cell. So now, when we actually, when we are getting this config, here we see the just empty cell. But now we are going to do main contract config to cell and provide it with config. So it's calling this function that we just created, which is composing the cell. And we use this cell as a data cell when we create the initial state of the contract. So now create from config is actually giving us the contract with the initial storage data the way our contract is expecting it to be. So now, as our create from config method is ready, let's update how we're using it inside of our test file. Because you see, obviously, we have an error. So we already provided the number, but we would need to have an address, some address that we want to keep in the storage. So let's use a treasury method of blockchain, which will enable us to create wallet. And this is just a seed phrase. We could use this seed phrase to return us some address, some unique address for this particular seed phrase. So we are providing number, counter value equal to 0, and address is going to be init address. So as you can see, we're not going to use this address of wallet, but we need to put something into the local storage. So we'll just use it as a placeholder for it. At this point, we're successfully initializing our contract. So congratulations. And as we are now also going to send a certain data inside the message body, then we'll also need to update another method of our wrapper. And this method is going to be send internal message, because now we will have to provide the amount on like how much we should increment the counter value on. And let's also rename it into the send increment. So we would know that this method is sending specifically incrementing comment, because we will have to put inside of our body here, we will have to put the code of comment. And let's see exactly how we're going to do this. So let's construct it like this. So we do message body, and we'll of course start with builder. So begin cell is a builder, and then whatever we call on it further, this is going to be filling the cell that we just opened with builder. So we're going to store uint. As you remember, we use integer 1. We give it 32 bits. Then we are going to store uint again, and we use another store uint to store the amount on which we should increment it by. But we don't know it yet, so we would expect it to arrive here. Increment by, it would be a number. And we would actually store this value increment by here and dedicate 32 bits again. As I said, we are completely owning the structure of the local storage. So this is just our decision how much bits to dedicate to this. And also, sometimes it's a matter of certain data types that should be dedicated certain amount of memory. So you should always keep in mind that how many bits you give to it if you're required to. So we got message body, and we can just place it here. While we're here on the wrapper, why don't we also update the get data method? Because now get data method is supposed to receive more data than just recent sender address. So we would expect it to return us first the current value of the counter. It would be a number. So we use the method number of stack. You can always try different, like see which methods are here to read certain type of values. So we are obviously going to read number. And then we're going to read the recent sender. Great. So now we are kind of all set to return to our testing file, to the main spec.ts. So as you can see, my contract doesn't have send internal message anymore, but it has send increment value. But send increment method would also expect the increment by value. So we will, let's increment it by 1. So we know that we put 0 in the beginning, then we send increment message. So we increment it by 1. And now we would actually expect it to be, we would expect this transaction to be successful, of course. And then we run this get data. And here we expect, just like we had this logic before, the recent sender to be sender wallet address. But another thing we would expect here, it would be, we expect data number to equal 1, because we just incremented it by 1. If we would put 5 here, then we would put 5 here as well. So at this point, we would expect our test to work. Let's try it out. Actually, it failed, but most likely, let me check. Let me check if our, yes. And one last thing that we need to do before we run our test is we need to rename the getter method, because otherwise our contract wouldn't return anything because we're calling not existing getter method. So I'm saving the file and I'm heading to the console and I'm doing yarn test. And interesting that we, as you can see, we are here incrementing by 5, while in the contract, we are incrementing by simply 1. So this is a little bit of a mistake. So we are using here, we would expect it to, so in this message that we do send increment, we are sending the integer for operation command and we do increment by. But here, we don't even read the increment by. We only read operation. So let's fix this. As you can see, we're already reading the operation integer. So the next one will be basically an integer with increment by. So we would expect integer, increment by, to be equal to load uint with 32 bits as well. So yeah, we would do here in message body, load uint, 32 bits. And of course, here we would do counter value plus increment by. And at this point, we would have the expected and received values properly set. Amazing. Let's do the last step. We're going to rename our test so it would show the proper title for us, because we are going to write even more tests in the upcoming lessons. So let's rename it to something that would better describe what it does. So it's a successfully increase counter in contract and get the proper most recent sender address. Voila, we have it ready. So see you in the next lesson, where we are going to do some cool logic on withdrawal and depositing funds. So stay tuned.